Euromaidan was a wave of demonstrations and civil unrest in Ukraine, which began on the night of November 21, 2013 with public protests in Maidan Nezalezhnosti in Kiev, demanding closer European integration. The scope of the protests expanded, with many calls for the resignation of President Viktor Yanukovych and his government. The protests ultimately led to the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution. Many protesters joined because of the violent dispersal of protesters on November 30 and a will to change life in Ukraine. By January 25, 2014, the protests had been fueled by the perception of widespread government corruption, abuse of power, and violation of human rights in Ukraine. The protests reached a climax during mid-February. On February 18, the worst clashes of Euromaidan broke out after the parliament did not accede to demands that the constitution of Ukraine be rolled back to its pre-2004 form, which would lessen presidential power. Police and protesters fired guns, with both live and rubber ammunition, in multiple locations in Kiev. The riot police advanced towards Maidan later in the day and clashed with the protesters but did not fully occupy it. The fights continued through the following days, in which the vast majority of casualties took place. On the night of February 21, Maidan vowed to go into armed conflict if Yanukovych did not resign by 10 a.m. Subsequently, the riot police retreated and Yanukovych and many other high government officials fled the country. Protesters gained control of the presidential administration and Yanukovych's private estate. The next day, the parliament impeached Yanukovych, replaced the government with a pro-European one, and ordered that Yulia Tymoshenko be released from prison. In the aftermath, the Crimean crisis began amid pro-Russian unrest. Despite the impeachment of Yanukovych, the installation of a new government, and the signature of the political provisions of the Ukraine-EU Association Agreement, the protests have been ongoing to sustain pressure on the government, counter pro-Russian protests, and reject Russian occupation of Ukraine. The general area of the pro-Ukraine and pro-Europe protests has shifted from Kiev and western Ukraine to include the eastern and southern areas of the country as well. Overview: the demonstrations began on the night of November 21, 2013, when protests erupted in the capital, Kiev, after the Ukrainian government suspended preparations for signing the Ukraine-European Union Association Agreement with the European Union, to seek closer economic relations with Russia. On November 24, 2013, first clashes between protesters and police began. Protesters strived to break cordon. Police used tear gas and batons, protesters also used tear gas and some firecrackers. After a few days of demonstrations, an increasing number of university students joined the protests. The Euromaidan has been repeatedly characterized as an event of major political symbolism for the European Union itself, particularly as the largest ever pro-European rally in history. The protests continued despite heavy police presence, regularly sub-freezing temperatures, and snow. Escalating violence from government forces in the early morning of November 30 caused the level of protests to rise, with 400,000 to €800,000 protesters, according to Russia's opposition politician Boris Nemtsov, demonstrating in Kiev on the weekends of December 1 and December 8. In the ensuing weeks, protest attendance had fluctuated from 50,000 to 200,000 during organized rallies. Violent riots took place December 1 and January 19 through 25 in response to police brutality and government repression. Since January 23, several western Ukrainian oblast governor buildings and regional councils have been occupied in a revolt by Euromaidan activists. In the Russophone cities of Zaporizhzhia, Sumy, and Dnipropetrovsk, protesters also tried to take over their local government building, and have been met with considerable force from both police and government supporters. According to journalist Lesia Bushok writing in February 18, 2014 issue of Newsweek magazine, Euromaidan had grown into something far bigger than just an angry response to the fallen-through EU deal. It's now about ousting Yanukovych and his corrupt government, guiding Ukraine away from its 200-year-long, deeply intertwined and painful relationship with Russia, and standing up for basic human rights to protest, speak and think freely and to act peacefully without the threat of punishment. A turning point came in late February, when enough members of the president's party fled or defected for the party to lose its majority in parliament, leaving the opposition large enough to form the necessary quorum. This allowed parliament to pass a series of laws that removed police from Kiev, cancelled anti-protest operations, restored the 2004 constitution, freed political detainees, and allegedly impeached the president. Yanukovych then fled to Ukraine's second-largest city of Kharkiv, refusing to recognize the parliament's decisions. The parliament assigned early elections for May 2014. Background, name history. The term Euromaidan was initially used as a hashtag on Twitter. A Twitter account named Euromaidan was created on the first day of the protests. It soon became popular in the international media. The name is composed of two parts. Euro is short for Europe and Maidan refers to Maidan Nezalezhnosti, the main square of Kiev, where the protests are centered. Maidan is a Ukrainian word for square, open space, ultimately from Arabic Maidan, which means square, or field. During the protests, the word Maidan has come to mean the act of public politics itself. The term Ukrainian Spring is sometimes used in reference to the Arab Spring, which was triggered by similar causes such as heavy-handed authoritarianism, widespread official corruption, kleptocracy, and lack of opportunity. Initial causes. On March 30, 2012, the European Union and Ukraine initiated an association agreement. However, the EU leaders later stated that the agreement would not be ratified unless Ukraine addressed concerns over a stark deterioration of democracy and the rule of law, including the imprisonment of Yulia Tymoshenko and Yulia Tymoshenko in 2011 and 2012. In the months leading up to the protests, Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych urged the parliament to adopt laws so that Ukraine would meet the EU's criteria. On September 25, 2013, chairman of the Verkhovna Rada Volodymyr Rybak stated he was sure that his parliament would pass all the laws needed to fit the EU criteria for the association agreement since, except for the Communist Party of Ukraine, the Verkhovna Rada has united around these bills. In mid-August 2013, Russia changed its customs regulations on imports from Ukraine such that on August 14, 2013, the Russian Customs Service stopped all goods coming from Ukraine and prompted politicians and sources to view the move as the start of a trade war against Ukraine to prevent Ukraine from signing a trade agreement with the European Union. Ukrainian Industrial Policy Minister Mikhailo Korolenko stated on December 18, 2013 that because of this Ukraine's exports had dropped by $1.4 billion. The State Statistics Service of Ukraine reported in November 2013 that in comparison with the same month of 2012, industrial production in Ukraine in October 2013 had fallen by 4.9%, in September 2013 by 5.6%. And in August 2013 by 5.4%. On November 21, 2013, a Ukrainian government decree suspended preparations for signing of the association agreement. The reason given was that the previous months Ukraine had experienced a drop in industrial production and our relations with CIS countries. The government also assured Ukraine will resume preparing the agreement when the drop in industrial production and our relations with CIS countries are compensated by the European market. According to Ukrainian Prime Minister Mykola Azarov, the extremely harsh conditions of an IMF loan, which included big budget cuts and a 40% increase in gas bills, had been the last argument in favor of the Ukrainian government's decision to suspend preparations for signing the association agreement. On December 7, 2013, the IMF clarified that it was not insisting on a single-stage increase in natural gas tariffs in Ukraine by 40%, but recommended that they be gradually raised to an economically justified level while compensating the poorest segments of the population for the losses from such an increase by strengthening targeted social assistance. The same day, IMF resident representative in Ukraine Євромaidan stated that this particular IMF loan is worth $4 billion and that it would be linked with policy, which would remove disproportions and stimulate growth. President Yanukovych attended the 28th November 29, 2013 EU summit in Vilnius, but the association agreement was not signed. both Yanukovych and high-level EU officials signaled that they wanted to sign the association agreement at a later date. In an interview with Lily Weymouth, Ukrainian billionaire businessman and opposition leader Petro Poroshenko said, "From the beginning, I was one of the organizers of the Maidan. My television channel Euro Channel 5 played a tremendously important role. On the 11th of December, when we had U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland and EU diplomat Catherine Ashton in Kiev, during the night they started to storm the Maidan." On December 11, 2013 the Prime Minister, Mykola Azarov, said he had asked for €20 billion in loans and aid to offset the cost of the EU deal. The EU was willing to offer €610 million in loans, however Russia was willing to offer $15 billion in loans. Russia also offered Ukraine cheaper gas prices. As a condition for the loans, the EU required major changes to the regulations and laws in Ukraine. Russia did not. Public opinion about Euromaidan, according to December 2013 polls, between 45% and 50% of Ukrainians supported Euromaidan, while between 42% and 50% opposed it. The biggest support for the protest can be found in Kiev and western Ukraine. Among Euromaidan protesters, 55% are from the west of the country, with 24% from central Ukraine and 21% from the east. In a poll taken on December 8, 73% of protesters had committed to continue protesting in Kiev as long as needed until their demands are fulfilled. This number has increased to 82% as of February 3, 2014. Polls also show that the nation is divided in age. While majority of young people are pro-EU, older generations more often prefer the customs union of Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Russia. More than 41% of protesters are ready to take part in the seizure of administrative buildings as of February, compared to 13 and 19% during polls on 10 and 20 December 2013. At the same time, more than 50% are ready to take part in the creation of independent military units, compared to 15 and 21% during the past studies, respectively. According to a January poll, 45% of Ukrainians supported the protests, and 48% of Ukrainians disapproved of Euromaidan. In a March poll, 57% of Ukrainians said they supported the Euromaidan protests. Public opinion about joining the EU, according to an August 2013 study by a Donetsk company, research and branding group, 49% of Ukrainians supported signing the association agreement, while 31% opposed it and the rest had not decided yet. However, in a December poll by the same company, only 30% claimed that terms of the association agreement would be beneficial for the Ukrainian economy, while 39% said they were unfavorable for Ukraine. In the same poll, only 30% said the opposition would be able to stabilize the society and govern the country well, if coming to power, while 37% disagreed. Authors of the GfK Ukraine poll conducted to October 15, 2013 claim that 45% of respondents believed Ukraine should sign an association agreement with the EU, whereas only 14% favored joining the customs union of Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Russia, and 15% preferred non-alignment. Full text of the EU-related question asked by GfK reads, should Ukraine sign the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, and, in the future, become an EU member? Another poll conducted in November by IFAK Ukraine for DW Trend showed 58% of Ukrainians supporting the country's entry into the European Union. On the other hand, a November 2013 poll by Kiev International Institute of Sociology showed 39% supporting the country's entry into the European Union and 37% supporting Ukraine's accession to the customs union of Belarus, Kazakhstan and Russia. In December 2013, then Prime Minister of Ukraine Mykola Azarov refuted the pro-EU poll numbers, claiming that many polls posed questions about Ukraine joining the EU, and that Ukraine had never been invited to join the Union, but only to sign the association agreement. Comparison with the Orange Revolution. The pro-European Union protests are Ukraine's largest since the Orange Revolution of 2004, which saw Yanukovych forced to resign as prime minister over allegations of voting irregularities. although comparing the 2013 events in the same east-west vector as 2004, with Ukraine remaining a key geopolitical prize in Eastern Europe for Russia and the EU, the Moscow Times noted that Yanukovych's government was in a significantly stronger position following his election in 2010. The Financial Times said the 2013 protests were largely spontaneous, sparked by social media, and have caught Ukraine's political opposition unprepared compared to their well-organized predecessors. The hashtag Euromaidan emerged immediately on the first meeting of the protests and was highly useful as a communication instrument for protesters. Vitaly Klitschko wrote in a tweet, "Friends, all those who came to Maidan, Independence Square, well done. Who has not done it yet, join us now." The protest hashtag also gained traction on the vKontakte social media network, and Klitschko tweeted a link to a speech he made on the square saying that once the protest was 100,000 strong, "we'll go for Yanukovych," referring to President Viktor Yanukovych. In an interview, opposition leader Yulia Tymoshenko, when asked if the current opposition was weaker than it was in 2004, argued that the opposition was stronger because the stakes were higher. "I asked each of the opposition leaders, do you realize that this is not a protest? It is a revolution. We have two roads, we go to prison or we win." Paul Robert Magaxi illustrated the effect of the Orange Revolution on Euromaidan, saying, "Was the Orange Revolution a genuine revolution? Yes, it was. And we see the effects today. The revolution wasn't a revolution of the streets or a revolution of elections. It was a revolution of the minds of people, in the sense that for the first time in a long time, Ukrainians and people living in territorial Ukraine saw the opportunity to protest and change their situation. This was a profound change in the character of the population of the former Soviet Union." Lviv-based historian Yaroslav Ritzok also remarked on the generational shift, "This is a revolution of the generation that we call the contemporaries of Ukraine's independence. It is more similar to the Occupy Wall Street protests or those in Istanbul demonstrations. It's a revolution of young people who are very educated, people who are active in social media, who are mobile and 90% of whom have university degrees, but who don't have futures." According to Ritzok, young Ukrainians resemble young Italians, Czech, Poles, or Germans more than they resemble Ukrainians who are 50 and older. This generation has a stronger desire for European integration and fewer regional divides than their seniors. In a Kiev International Institute of Sociology poll taken in September, joining the European Union was mostly supported by young Ukrainians, higher than the national average of 43.2% support. A November 2013 poll by the same institute found the same result, with 70.8% aged 18 to 29 wanting to join the European Union while 39.7% was the national average of support. An opinion poll by GfK conducted to October 15 found that among respondents aged 16 to 29 with a position on integration, 73% favored signing an association agreement with the EU, while only 45% of those over the age of 45 favored association. The lowest support for European integration was among people with incomplete secondary and higher education. Escalation to violence. The movement started peacefully but did not end that way. Protesters felt authorized to use violence after the government's crackdown on protesters, which happened during the night of November 30, 2013. The Associated Press described the evolution this way: on February 19, the latest bout of street violence began Tuesday when protesters attacked police lines and set fires outside Parliament, accusing Yanukovych of ignoring their demands to enact constitutional reforms that would limit the president's power, a key opposition demand. Parliament, dominated by his supporters, was stalling on taking up a constitutional reform to limit presidential powers. Police responded by attacking the protest camp. Armed with water cannons, stun grenades and rubber bullets, police dismantled some barricades. But the protesters held their ground through the night, encircling the protest camp with new burning barricades of tires, furniture and debris. In the early stages of Euromaidan, there was discussion about whether the Euromaidan movement constituted a revolution, or a staged color revolution by outside forces. At the time, many protest leaders had already used this term frequently when addressing the public. Yanukovych called in an official December 2 press release for police officers and members of the military to defect to the Ukrainian revolution. In a Skype interview with media analyst Andriy Hulivatij, Vitaly Portnikov, council member of the Maidan National Alliance and president and editor-in-chief of the Ukrainian television channel TVI, stated Euromaidan is a revolution and revolutions can drag on for years, and that, what is happening in Ukraine goes much deeper. It is changing the national fabric of Ukraine. Select media outlets in the region have dubbed this staged movement, a revolution. On December 10, President Viktor Yanukovych stated calls for a revolution pose a threat to national security. Former Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili has described the movement as the first geopolitical revolution of the 21st century. Political expert Anders Aslund commented on this aspect, "Revolutionary times have their own logic that is very different from the logic of ordinary politics, as writers from Alexis de Tocqueville to Crane Brinton have taught. The first thing to understand about Ukraine today is that it has entered a revolutionary stage. Like it or not, we had better deal with the new environment rationally." Demands. On November 29, a formal resolution by protest organizers proposed the following: form a coordinating committee to communicate with the European community. To state that the President, Parliament and the Cabinet of Ministers aren't capable of carrying out a geopolitically strategic course of development for the state and calls on Yanukovych's resignation. Demand the cessation of political repressions against Euromaidan activists, students, civic activists and opposition leaders. The resolution stated that on December 1, on the 22nd anniversary of Ukraine's independence referendum, that the group will gather at noon on Independence Square to announce their further course of action. After the forced police dispersal of all protesters from Maidan Nezalezhnosti on the night of November 30, the dismissal of Minister of Internal Affairs Yulia Tymoshenko became one of the protesters' main demands. A petition to the U.S. White House demanding sanctions against Viktor Yanukovych and Ukrainian government ministers gathered over 100,000 signatures in 4 days. Ukrainian students nationwide have also demanded the dismissal of Minister of Education Dmytro Tabaknuk. On December 5, Batkivshchina faction leader Arseniy Yatsenyuk stated, "Our three demands to the Verkhovna Rada and the President remained unchanged: the resignation of the government, the release of all political prisoners, first and foremost, the release of former Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko, and the release of 9 individuals who were illegally convicted after being present at a rally on Bankova Street on December 1. The suspension of all criminal cases, and the arrest of all Berkut officers who were involved in the illegal beating up of children on Maidan Nezalezhnosti." The opposition also demanded that the government resumed negotiations with the IMF for a loan that they saw as key to helping Ukraine through economic troubles that have made Yanukovych lean toward Russia. Timeline of the events. The Euromaidan protest movement began on November 21, 2013, as a peaceful protest. Riots in Kiev. On November 30, 2013, the protests were dispersed violently by the Berkut riot police units, sparking riots the following day in Kiev. On December 1, 2013, protesters reoccupied the square, and through December further clashes with the authorities and political ultimatums by the opposition ensued. This culminated in a series of anti-protest laws by the government on January 16, 2014, and further rioting on Reshevskoho Street. Early February 2014 saw a bombing of the trade unions building, as well as the formation of self-defense teams by protesters. December 1, 2013 riots. December 11, 2013 assault. 2014 Reshevskoho Street riots. On January 19, a Sunday mass protest, the 9th in a row, took place, gathering up to 200,000 in central Kiev to protest the new anti-protest laws, dubbed the dictatorship laws. Many protesters ignored the face concealment ban by wearing party masks, hard hats and gas masks. Opposition leader Vitaly Klitschko appeared covered with powder after he was sprayed with a fire extinguisher. riot police and government supporters cornered a group of people who were trying to seize government buildings. The number of riot police on Hrushevskoho Street increased after buses and army trucks showed up. The latter resulted in the buses being burned as a barricade. The next day, a cleanup began in Kiev. On January 22, more violence erupted in Kiev. This resulted in 8 to 9 people dead. 2014 Ukrainian Revolution. Protests across Ukraine. A November 24 protest in Ivano-Frankivsk saw several thousand protesters gather at the regional administration building. No classes were held in the universities of western Ukrainian cities such as Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk and Uzhhorod. Protests also took place in other large Ukrainian cities, Kharkiv, Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, Luhansk, Lviv, and Uzhhorod. The rally in Lviv in support of the integration of Ukraine into the EU was initiated by the students of local universities. This rally saw €30,000 protesters gather on Prospect Svobody in Lviv. The organizers plan to continue this rally till the Third Eastern Partnership Summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, on 28 November 29, 2013. A rally in Simferopol, which drew around 300, saw nationalists and Crimean Tatars unite to support European integration. The protesters sang both the Ukrainian national anthem and the anthem of the Ukrainian Sikh riflemen. 7 people were injured after 40 Tychishki attacked a tent encampment in Dnipropetrovsk, which was ordered cleared by court order on November 25. Officials estimated the number of attackers to be 10-15, and police did not intervene in the attacks. Similarly, police in Odessa ignored calls to stop the demolition of Euromaidan camps in the city by a group of 30, and instead removed all parties from the premises. 50 police officers and men in plain clothes also drove out a Euromaidan protest in Chernihiv the same day. On November 25, in Odessa, 120 police raided and destroyed a tent encampment made by protesters at 5:20 in the morning. The police detained 3 of the protesters, including the leader of the Odessa branch of Democratic Alliance, Alexei Chorny. All 3 were beaten in the police vehicle and then taken to the Porto-Frankovsk police station without their arrival being recorded. The move came after the district administrative court hours earlier issued a ban restricting citizens' right to peaceful assembly until New Year. The court ruling places a blanket ban on all demonstrations, the use of tents, sound equipment and vehicles until the end of the year. On November 26, a rally of 50 was held in Donetsk. On November 28, a rally was held in Yalta. University faculty who attended were pressured to resign by university officials. On November 29, Lviv protesters numbered some 20,000. Like in Kiev, they locked hands in a human chain, symbolically linking Ukraine to the European Union. On December 1, the largest rally outside of Kiev took place in Lviv by the statue of Taras Shevchenko, where over 50,000 protesters attended. Mayor Andriy Sadovy, council chairman Peter Kolody, and prominent public figures and politicians were in attendance. An estimated 300 rallied in the eastern city of Donetsk demanding that President Viktor Yanukovych and the government of Prime Minister Mykola Azarov resign. Meanwhile, in Kharkiv, thousands rallied with writer Євромaidan, during a speech, calling for revolution. The protest was peaceful. Protesters claimed at least 4,000 attended, with other sources saying 2,000. In Dnipropetrovsk, 1,000 gathered to protest the EU agreement's suspension, show solidarity with those in Kiev, and demand the resignation of local and metropolitan officials. They later marched, shouting "Ukraine is Europe," and "Revolution." Euromaidan protests were also held in Simferopol, and Odessa. On December 2, in an act of solidarity, Lviv Oblast declared a general strike to mobilize support for protests in Kiev, which was followed by the formal order of a general strike by the cities of Ternopil and Ivano-Frankivsk. In Dnipropetrovsk on December 3, a group of 300 protested in favor of European integration and demanded the resignation of local authorities, heads of local police units, and the security service of Ukraine. On December 7 it was reported that police were prohibiting those from Ternopil and Ivano-Frankivsk from driving to Kiev. Protests on December 8 saw record turnout in many Ukrainian cities, including several in eastern Ukraine. On the evening, the fall of the monument to Lenin in Kiev took place. The statue made out of stone was completely hacked to pieces by jubilant demonstrators. On December 9, a statue of Vladimir Lenin was destroyed in the town of Kotovsk in Odessa Oblast. In Ternopil, Euromaidan organizers were prosecuted by authorities. The removal or destruction of Lenin monuments and statues gained particular momentum after the destruction of the Kiev Lenin statue. Under the motto th micron th 1/2 n th 1/2 th 3/4 th degree th, activists pulled down a dozen monuments in the Kiev region, Tsitomyr, Chmelnytsky, and elsewhere, or damaged them during the course of the Euromaidan protests into spring of 2014. In other cities and towns, monuments were removed by organized heavy equipment and transported to scrap yards or dumps. On December 14, Euromaidan supporters in Kharkiv voiced their disapproval of authorities fencing off Freedom Square from the public by covering the metal fence in placards. They have since December 5 been the victims of theft and arson. A Euromaidan activist in Kharkiv was attacked by two men and stabbed 12 times. The assailants were unknown, but activists told the Kharkiv-based civic organization Maidan that they believe the city's mayor, Gennady Kerns, to be behind the attack. On December 22, 2000 rallied in Dnipropetrovsk. In late December, 500 marched in Donetsk. Due to the regime's hegemony in the city, foreign commentators have suggested that, for 500 marchers to assemble in Donetsk is the equivalent of 50,000 in Lviv or 500,000 in Kiev. On January 5, marches in support of Euromaidan were held in Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa, and Kharkiv. The latter three drawing several hundred and Donetsk only 100. On January 11, 150 activists met in Kharkiv for a general forum on uniting the nationwide Euromaidan efforts. A church where some were meeting was stormed by over a dozen thugs, and others attacked meetings in a bookstore, smashing windows and deploying tear gas to stop the Maidan meetings from taking place. On January 22 in Donetsk, two simultaneous rallies were held, one pro-Euromaidan and one pro-government. The pro-government rally attracted 600 attendees to about 100 from the Euromaidan side. Police reports claimed 5,000 attended to support the government, to only 60 from Euromaidan. In addition, approximately 150 Tchaikovsky appeared and encircled the Euromaidan protesters with megaphones and began a conflict, burning wreaths and Svoboda party flags, and shouted down with fascists, but were separated by police. Meanwhile, Donetsk City Council pleaded with the government to take tougher measures against Euromaidan protesters in Kiev. Reports indicated a media blackout took place in Donetsk. In Lviv on January 22, amid the police shootings of protesters in the capital, military barracks were surrounded by protesters. Many of the protesters included mothers whose sons are serving in the military, and pleaded with them not to deploy to Kiev. In Vinnytsia on January 22, thousands of protesters blocked the main street of the city and the traffic. Also, they brought democracy in coffin to the city hall, as a present to Yanukovych. January 23, Odessa City Council member and Euromaidan activist Oleksandr Ostapenko's car was bombed. The mayor of Sumy threw his support behind the Euromaidan movement on January 24, laying blame for the civil disorder in Kiev on the Party of Regions and Communists. The Crimean parliament repeatedly stated that because of the events in Kiev it was ready to join autonomous Crimea to Russia. On February 27, armed men seized the Crimean parliament and raised the Russian flag. In the beginning of March, thousands of Crimean Tatars in support of Euromaidan clashed with pro-Russian protesters in Simferopol. On March 4, 2014, a mass pro-Euromaidan rally was held in Donetsk for the first time. About 2,000 people were there. Donetsk is a major city in the far east of Ukraine and serves as Yanukovych's stronghold and the base of his supporters. On March 5, 2014, 7,000 to 10,000 people rallied in support of Euromaidan in the same place. After a leader declared the rally over, a fight broke out between pro-Euromaidan and 2,000 pro-Russian protesters. Occupation of administrative buildings. Starting on January 23, several western Ukrainian oblast governor buildings and regional councils were occupied by Euromaidan activists. Several RSAs of the occupied oblasts then decided to ban the activities and symbols of the Communist Party of Ukraine and Party of Regions in their oblast. In the cities Zaporizhzhia, Dnipropetrovsk and Odessa, protesters also tried to take over their local RSA. Protests outside Ukraine. Smaller protests or Euromaidans have been held internationally, primarily among the larger Ukrainian diaspora populations in North America and Europe. The largest took place on December 8 in New York, with over 1,000 attending. Notably, in December 2013, Warsaw's Palace of Culture and Science, Buffalo Electric Vehicle Company Tower in Buffalo, Cira Center in Philadelphia, the Tbilisi City Hall in Georgia, and Niagara Falls on the U.S.-Canada border were illuminated in blue and yellow as a symbol of solidarity with Ukraine. Anti-Maidan and pro-government rallies. Pro-government rallies during Euromaidan have largely been credited as funded by the government. Several news outlets have investigated the claims to confirm that by and large, attendees at pro-government rallies do so for financial compensation and not for political reasons, and are not an organic response to the Euromaidan. People stand at Euromaidan protesting against the violation of human rights in the state, and they are ready to make sacrifices, said Oleksiy Heron, a political scientist at Kiev Academy in Kiev. People at Anti-Maidan stand for money only. The government uses these hirelings to provoke resistance. They won't be sacrificing anything. Euromaidan groups, Euromaidan. Euromaidan is a movement within the Euromaidan that seeks the resignation of the Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. It is made up mainly of drivers who would protect the protest camps and blockade streets. It organized a car procession on December 29, 2013 to the president's residence in Meskhia to voice their protests at his refusal to sign the Ukraine-European Union Association Agreement in December 2013. The motorcade was stopped a couple of hundred meters short of his residence. Euromaidan has been the repeated target of violent attacks by government forces and supporters. Self-defense groups. On November 30, 2013, the day after the dispersion of Euromaidan, Euromaidan organizers, aided by groups such as Svoboda, have created self-defense of the Maidan, a Euro formation for protecting protesters from police and providing security within the city. Head of self-defense is Andrei Paryubyi. The groups are divided up into sotnia, or hundreds, which have been described as a resilient force that is providing the tip of the spear in the violent showdown with government security forces. The sotni take their name from a traditional form of Cossacks' cavalry formation, and were also used in the Ukrainian National Army. Activists estimate at least 32 such groups are in Kiev now, with more forming all the time. Along with self-defense headed by Mr. Paryubyi, there are some independent divisions, like the security of the trade unions building until January 2, 2014, Narnia and Vikings from Kiev City State Administration, Volodymyr Parasyuk's Sotnia from Conservatory Building, etc. Mr. Paryubyi officially asked such divisions to not call themselves self-defense. Pravy sector coordinates its actions with self-defense and is formally a 23rd Sotnia, although already had hundreds of members at the time of registering as a Sotnia. Second Sotnia tends to dissociate itself from Sotnias of self-defense of Maidan. Casualties, deaths. The first of major casualties occurred on the Day of Unity of Ukraine, January 22, 2014. 4 people permanently lost their vision, and 1 man died by falling from a colonnade. The circumstances of his death are unclear. At least 5 more people were confirmed dead during the clashes on January 22. 4 people perished from gunshot wounds. Medics confirmed bullet wounds to be from firearms such as a Dragunov sniper rifle and possibly a Makarov handgun, and the deaths of Nihyin and Tsaitsevsky. There are photos of Berkut utilizing shotguns, and reporters verified the presence of shotgun casings littering the ground. Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office confirmed 2 deaths from gunshot wounds in Kiev protests. We are pursuing several lines of inquiry into these murders, including that they may have been committed by Berkut officers, Vitaly Sakal, First Deputy Chief of the Ukrainian Interior Ministry's main investigative directorate, told a press conference in Kiev on Friday. It was established that the weapons and cartridges that were used to commit these killings are hunting cartridges. Such is the conclusion of forensic experts. Most likely, it was a smoothbore firearm. I want to stress that the cartridges which were used to commit the murders were not used by, and are not in use of, the police. They have no such cartridges, said First Deputy Chief of the Ukrainian Interior Ministry's main investigative directorate. The MVS has not ruled out that Berkut officers committed the killings. On January 31 it was discovered that 26 unidentified, unclaimed bodies remained in the Kiev Central Morgue. 14 of which were from January alone. Journalists revealed that a mass burial was planned on February 4, 2014. The Kiev city administration followed on the announcement with its own statement informing that there are 14 such bodies. 5 from January. On 18 and 19 February, at least 26 people were killed in clashes with police. Moreover, a self-defense soldier from Maidan was found dead. Journalist Vyacheslav Veremyi was murdered by pro-government Tchaikovsky and shot in the chest when they attacked his taxi. It was announced that an additional €50 people died in the fire that engulfed the trade union building after police attempted to seize it the night before. On February 20, gunfire killed 60 people, according to an opposition medical service. At least 79 people were killed and 570 injured. At least 13 officers were killed and 130 hospitalized with gunshot wounds. Investigation into shooters snipers, Reshevskoho Street riot shootings. During the 2014 Reshevskoho Street riots of 22 January 25, 3 protesters were killed by firearms. Oleh Chatarov, Deputy Chief of the Ukrainian Interior Ministry's main investigative directorate under Yanukovych, claimed in January that, the theory we are looking at is the killing was by unidentified persons. This is an official theory, and the unidentified persons could be various people, a whole host of them. It could have been motivated by disruptive behavior, or with the aim of provocation. He then claimed the cartridges and weapons used in the shootings were not police issue. Forensics experts found that protesters were killed with both buckshot and rifle bullets, while medics confirmed the bullet wounds to be from firearms such as the Dragunov sniper rifle and possibly 9A, 18mm Makarov cartridges. A report published on January 25 by Armament Research Services, a specialty arms and munitions consultancy in Perth, Australia, stated that the mysterious cufflink-shaped projectiles presumably fired by riot police on Reshevskoho Street at protesters during clashes were not meant for riot control, but for stopping vehicles, busting through doors and piercing armor. The bullets, writes Jansen Jones, who specializes in Eastern Bloc weapons, are special armor-piercing 12-gauge shotgun projectiles, likely developed and produced by the Spetstechnika Design Bureau, a facility located in Kiev and associated with the Ministry of Internal Affairs. On January 31, 2014, Vitaly Sakal, First Deputy Chief of the Ukrainian Interior Ministry's main investigative directorate, told a press conference that, we are pursuing several lines of inquiry into these murders, including, that they may have been committed by Berkut officers. Snipers deployed during the Ukrainian Revolution, following the revolution of 18 February 23 that saw over 100 killed in gunfire, the government's new health minister, Oleh Musi, a doctor who helped oversee medical treatment for casualties during the protests, suggested to the Associated Press that the similarity of bullet wounds suffered by opposition victims and police indicates the shooters were trying to stoke tensions on both sides and spark even greater violence, with the goal of toppling Yanukovych. I think it wasn't just a part of the old regime but it was also the work of Russian special forces who served and maintained the ideology of the regime, he said, citing forensic evidence. Gennady Moskal, a former deputy head of Ukraine's main security agency, the SBU, and of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, suggested in an interview published in the Ukrainian newspaper Dzerkalo Tizhnya that snipers from the MIA and SBU were responsible for the shootings, not foreign agents, acting on contingency plans dating back to Soviet times, stating, snipers received orders to shoot not only protesters, but also police forces. This was all done to escalate the conflict, to justify the police operation to clear Maidan. The Times reported that a telephone call between Estonian Foreign Minister Urmas Paet and High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy Catherine Ashton had been intercepted, in which Paet stated that a doctor named Olga stated that victims from both sides were shot by the same snipers and that Olga had photos of the shooting victims with the same handwriting. Paet said he found it really disturbing that now the new coalition doesn't want to investigate what exactly happened, and that there is a stronger and stronger understanding that behind snipers it was not Yanukovych, it was somebody from the new coalition. However, Paet later denied that he implicated the opposition in anything, as he was merely relaying rumors he had heard without giving any assessment of their veracity, while acknowledging that the phone call was genuine. Olga Bogomolets, the doctor, who allegedly claimed that protesters and Berkut troops came under fire from the same source, said she had not told Paet that policemen and protesters had been killed in the same manner, that she did not imply that the opposition was implicated in the killings, and that the government informed her that an investigation had been started. On March 12, 2014, Interior Minister Avakov has stated that the conflict was provoked by a non-Ukrainian third party, and that an investigation was ongoing. On March 21, 2014, Ole Makhnytsky, Ukraine Parliamentary Commissioner for the Supervision of the General Prosecutor of Ukraine and a member of the right-wing Svoboda Party, stated that the government had identified the snipers shooting at the demonstrators in Kiev as Ukrainian citizens, but did not release their names. On March 31, 2014, the Daily Beast published photos and videos which show that the snipers were members of the Ukrainian Security Service's anti-terrorist Alpha Team unit, who had been trained in Russia. The media suggested that it was not the Ukrainian riot police which fired on the protesters as previously believed, although the members of Alpha Team are Ukrainian citizens. On April 2, law enforcement authorities announced in a press conference they had detained 9 suspects in the 18 February 20 shootings of Euromaidan activists, Acting Prosecutor General of Ukraine Ole Makhnytsky reported. Among the detainees was the leader of the sniper squad. All of the detained are officers of the Kiev City Berkut unit, and verified the involvement of the SBU's Alpha group in the shootings. Officials also reported that they plan to detain additional suspects in the Maidan shootings in the near future, and stressed that the investigation is ongoing, but hindered by the outgoing regime's destruction of all documents and evidence. Ukraine's Ministry of Internal Affairs confirmed that Viktor Yanukovych gave the order to fire on protesters on February 20. During the press conference, Ukraine unregistered trademark's Interior Minister, Chief Prosecutor and Top Security Chief implicated more than 30 Russian FSB agents in the crackdown on protesters, who in addition to taking part in the planning, flew large quantities of explosives into an airport near Kiev. Valentin Nalyvachenko, the interim head of Ukraine unregistered trademark SSBU State Security Agency, said the agents were stationed in Kiev during the entire Euromaidan protests, were provided with a Euro state telecommunications while residing at an SBU compound, and in regular contact with Ukrainian security officials. We have substantiated grounds to consider that these very groups which were located at an SBU training ground took part in the planning and execution of activities of this so-called anti-terrorist operation, said Nalyvachenko. Investigators, he said, had established that Yanukovych's SBU chief Oleksandr Yakymenko, who had fled the country, had received reports from FSB agents while they were stationed in Ukraine, and that Yakymenko held several briefings with the agents. Russia's Federal Security Bureau rejected the comments as groundless accusations, and otherwise refused to comment. Press and medics injured by police attacks. A number of attacks by law enforcement agents on members of the media and medical personnel have been reported. Some 40 journalists were injured during the staged assault at Bankova Street on December 1, 2013. At least 42 more journalists were victims of police attacks at Reshevskoho Street on January 22, 2014. On January 22, 2014, television news service reported that journalists started to remove their identifying uniform, as they were being targeted, sometimes on purpose, sometimes accidentally. Since November 21, 2013, a total of 136 journalists have been injured. On January 21, 2014, 26 journalists were injured, with at least 2 badly injured by police stun grenades. 2 others were arrested by police. On January 22, a correspondent of Reuters, Vasily Fedosenko, was intentionally shot in the head by a marksman with rubber ammunition during clashes at Reshevskoho Street. Later, a journalist of Espresso TV Dmytro Dvoychenkov was kidnapped, beaten and taken to an unknown location, but later a parliamentarian was informed that he was finally released. On January 24, President Yanukovych ordered the release of all journalists from custody. On January 31, a video from January 22, 2014 was published that showed policemen in Berkut uniforms intentionally firing at a medic who raised his hands. Impact. Known impact to date includes the following: support for Euromaidan in Ukraine. According to an 4 to December 9, 2013 study by research and branding group, 49% of all Ukrainians supported Euromaidan and 45% had the opposite opinion. It was mostly supported in western and central Ukraine. A third of residents of South Ukraine and 13% of residents of eastern Ukraine supported Euromaidan as well. The percentage of people who do not support the protesters was 81% in East Ukraine, 60% in South Ukraine, in Central Ukraine 27% and in Western Ukraine 11%. Polls have shown that 2/3 of Kievans support the ongoing protests. A poll conducted by the Kyiv Democratic Initiatives Fund and Razumkov Center, between 20th and 24th December, showed that over 50% of Ukrainians supported the Euromaidan protests, while 42% opposed it. Another research and branding group survey showed that 45% of Ukrainians supported Euromaidan, while 50% did not. 43% of those polled thought that Euromaidan's consequences sooner could be negative, while 31% of the respondents thought the opposite. 17% believed that Euromaidan would bring no negative consequences. An Eco-Kyiv Democratic Initiatives Foundation survey of protesters conducted 7th and 8th December 2013 found that 92% of those who came to Kiev from across Ukraine came on their own initiative, 6.3% was organized by a public movement, and 1.8% were organized by a party. 70% said they came to protest the police brutality of November 30, and 54% to protest in support of the European Union Association Agreement signing. Among their demands, 82% wanted detained protesters freed, 80% wanted the government to resign, and 75% want President Yanukovych to resign and for snap elections. The poll showed that 49.8% of the protesters are residents of Kiev and 50.2% came from elsewhere in Ukraine. 38% of the protesters are aged between 15 and 29, 49% are aged between 30 and 54 and 13% are 55 or older. A total of 57.2% of the protesters are men. In the eastern regions of Donetsk, Luhansk and Kharkiv, 29% of the population believe in certain circumstances, an authoritarian regime may be preferable to a democratic one. Public opinion about association agreement, according to an 4 to December 9, 2013 study by research and branding group, 46% of Ukrainians supported the integration of the country into EU, and 36% into the customs union of Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Russia. Most support for EU integration could be found in West and in Central Ukraine. 30% of residents of South Ukraine and 18% of residents of Eastern Ukraine supported the integration with EU as well. Integration with the customs union was supported by 61% of East Ukraine and 54% of South Ukraine, and also by 22% of Central and 7% of Western Ukraine. according to a 7 to December 17, 2013 poll by the sociological group Rating. 49.1% of respondents would vote for Ukraine's accession to the European Union in a referendum, and 29.6% would vote against the motion. Meanwhile, 32.5% of respondents would vote for Ukraine's accession to the customs union of Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Russia, and 41.9% would vote against. Political impact. During the annual World Economic Forum meeting at the end of January 2014 in Davos, Ukrainian Prime Minister Mykola Azarov received no invitations to the main events. According to the Financial Times' Gideon Rachman, because the Ukrainian government was blamed for the violence of the 2014 Reshevskoho street riots. A telephone call was leaked of U.S. diplomat Victoria Nuland speaking to the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Piat, about the future of the country, in which she said that Klitschko should not be in the future government, and expressed her preference for Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who became interim prime minister. She also casually stated "fuck the EU." German Chancellor Angela Merkel said she deemed Nuland's comment completely unacceptable. Commenting on the situation afterwards, State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki said that Nuland had apologized to her EU counterparts, while White House spokesman Jay Carney alleged that because it had been tweeted out by the Russian government, it says something about Russia's role. The Ib Times reported, if Svoboda and other far-right groups gain greater exposure through their involvement in the protests, there are fears they could gain more sympathy and support from a public grown weary of political corruption and Russian influence on Ukraine. On February 23, 2014, following the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution, the Rada passed a bill that would have altered the law on languages of minorities, including Russian. The bill would have made Ukrainian the sole state language at all levels. However, President Turkmenov vetoed the bill. Economic impact. The Prime Minister, Mykola Azarov, asked for €20 billion in loans and aid from the EU. The EU was willing to offer €610 million in loans, however Russia was willing to offer $15 billion in loans. Russia also offered the Ukraine cheaper gas prices. As a condition for the loans, the EU required major changes to the regulations and laws in the Ukraine. Russia did not. Moody's Investors Service reported on December 4, 2013, as a consequence of the severity of the protests, demand for foreign currency is likely to rise, and noted that this was another blow to Ukraine's already poor solvency. First Deputy Prime Minister Serhiy Arbuzov stated on December 7 Ukraine risked a default if it failed to raise $10 billion. I asked for a loan to support us, and Europe, the EU agreed, but a mistake was made. We failed to put it on paper. On December 3, Azarov warned that Ukraine might not be able to fulfill its natural gas contracts with Russia. And he blamed the deal on restoring gas supplies of January 18, 2009 for this. On December 5, Prime Minister Mykola Azarov stated that money to finance the payment of pensions, wages, social payments, support of the operation of the housing and utility sector and medical institutions do not appear due to unrest in the streets. And he added that authorities were doing everything possible to ensure the timely financing of them. Minister of Social Policy of Ukraine Natalia Korolevska stated on January 2, 2014 that these January 2014 payments would begin according to schedule. On December 11, the second Azarov government postponed social payments due to the temporarily blocking of the government. The same day Reuters commented the crisis has added to the financial hardship of a country on the brink of bankruptcy, and added that investors thought it more likely than not that Ukraine would default over the next 5 years. Fitch Ratings reported on December 16 that the standoff had led to greater the risk that political uncertainty will raise demand for foreign currency, causing additional reserve losses and increasing the risk of disorderly currency movement. It also added interest rates rose sharply as the national bank sought to tighten hryvnia liquidity. First Deputy Finance Minister Anatoly Myarkovsky stated on December 17 the Ukrainian government budget deficit in 2014 could amount to about 3% with a plus or minus deviation of 0.5%. On December 18, the day after an economical agreement with Russia was signed, Prime Minister Mykola Azarov stated, Nothing is threatening stability of the financial economic situation in Ukraine now. Not a single economic factor. However, BBC News reported that the deal will not fix Ukraine's deeper economic problems in an article titled "Russian Bailout Masks Ukraine's Economic Mess." On January 21, 2014, the Kiev city-state administration claimed that protests in Kiev had so far caused the city more than $2 million worth of damage. It intended to claim compensation for damage caused by all demonstrators, regardless of their political affiliation. On February 5, 2014, the hryvnia fell to a 5-year low against the US dollar. On February 21, 2014, Standard & Poor's cut Ukraine's credit rating to CCC, adding that the country risked default without significantly favorable changes. Standard & Poor's analysts believe the compromise deal of the same day between President Yanukovych and the opposition made it less likely Ukraine would receive desperately needed Russian aid, thereby increasing the risk of default on its debts. Social impact: in Kiev, life continued as normal outside the protest zone. Euromaidan was named Word of the Year for 2013 by Modern Ukrainian Language and Slang Dictionary Myslevo, and the most popular neologism in Russia by web analytics company Public.ru. Cultural impact: according to a representative of the Kiev History Museum, its collection in the Ukrainian house on the night of February 19, after it was recaptured by the police from the protesters. Eyewitnesses report seeing the police forces plundering and destroying the museum's property. Music of Maidan. Ukrainian-Polish band Taraka came up with a song dedicated to Euromaidan Podazhra unregistered trademark car and registered trademark Ukraini. The song uses the first several words of the national anthem of Ukraine. Ukraine has not yet died. Among other tunes, some remakes of the Ukrainian folk song Aflame the Pine Was on Fire appeared. Ukrainian, THTH 3/4 N Euro NTHTH degree NTH 3/4 NTH 1/2 TH degree, THTH degree THTH degree THTH degree. The Ukrainian band Skribin created a song dedicated to the revolutionary days of Maidan. Another native of Kiev dedicated a song to Tchishky. DJ Rudy Paulenko created a track inspired by events on Maidan called The Battle at Maidan. Films of Maidan, a compilation of short films about the 2013 revolution named Babylon 13, was created. Polish and Ukrainian activists created a short film, Happy Kiev, editing it with the Pharrell Williams hit Happy, and some shoots of Babylon 13. On February 5, 2014, a group of activist cinematographers initiated a series of films about the people of Euromaidan. Art of Maidan. Some photo correspondents created numerous unique pictures of everyday life at Maidan. Some artists expressed their solidarity with Maidan. Sport: the 2013 Euro 14 UEFA Europa League round of 32 match of February 20, 2014 between FC Dynamo Kiev and Valencia CF was moved by UEFA from Kiev's Olimpijski National Sports Complex to the GSP Stadium in Nicosia, Cyprus, due to the security situation in the Ukrainian capital. On February 19, the Ukrainian athletes competing in the 2014 Winter Olympics asked for and were refused permission by the International Olympic Committee to wear black armbands to honor those killed in the violent clashes in Kiev. IOC President Thomas Bach offered his condolences to those who have lost loved ones in these tragic events. On February 19, 2014, alpine skier Bohdana Matsutska refused to further participate in the 2014 Winter Olympics in protest against the violent clashes in Kiev. She and her father posted a message on Facebook stating in solidarity with the fighters on the barricades of the Maidan, and as a protest against the criminal actions made towards the protesters, the irresponsibility of the president and his lackey government, we refuse further performance at the Olympic Games in Sochi 2014. On March 4, 2014, the 2013 Euro 14 Eurocup basketball round of 16 game between BC Budivelnyk Kiev and JSF Nanterre was moved to Angstrom 1/2 Algaris Arena in Kaunas, Lithuania. On March 5, 2014, another round of 16 game between Khimki Uzhny and Icon TED Ankara was moved to Abdiapekchi Arena in Istanbul. Trends and symbolism. A common chant among protesters is "Glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes." The chant has extended beyond Ukrainians and has been used by Crimean Tatars and Russians. The red and black battle flag of the Ukrainian insurgent army is another popular symbol among protesters, and the wartime insurgents have acted as a large inspiration for Euromaidan protesters. Serhiy Yekelchuk of the University of Victoria says the use of UPA imagery and slogans was more of a potent symbol of protest against the current government and Russia rather than adulation for the insurgents themselves, explaining the reason for the sudden prominence of UPA symbolism in Kiev is that it is the strongest possible expression of protest against the pro-Russian orientation of the current government. The colors of the flag symbolize Ukrainian red blood spilled on Ukrainian black earth. On various resources, such as design contest, numerous graphic design competitions were started in support of Euromaidan and its symbolism. Reactions. The EU has imposed sanctions and President Obama of the US has signed an executive order with a framework for sanctions in response to Russian intervention in Crimea. See also, 2014 Crimean Crisis, Orange Revolution, Politics of Ukraine, Rise Up, Ukraine. Ukraine without Kuchma, National Guard of Ukraine, Notes. References. External links, Euromaidan collected news and commentary at the Kiev Post, Euromaidan Press, webcam on Maidan Nezalezhnosti, Espresso TV live on YouTube.